It was 2:17 in the morning when Jasmine Crockett's phone buzzed. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her gut told her this wasn't just another call. On the line, a voice, measured, smooth, and chillingly clear. "This is your final warning. If you speak tomorrow, your family becomes the headline." That voice belonged to Melania Trump. Some calls are private. This one wasn't meant to be, because what came next wasn't just a choice. It was a boundary drawn between fear and truth. By sunrise, the halls of Congress would carry the weight of what one woman decided to bring into the open. Jasmine didn't raise her tone. She hit play. What you're about to hear is a dramatized retelling, shaped for story but grounded in something real. The emotions, the power moves, the quiet strength it takes to stand tall when it's easier. To step back, those aren't made up. They echo too honestly to be fiction. This isn't about payback. It's about what happens when silence is no longer acceptable and someone decides to speak anyway. This is the call that rocked Congress. The harsh lights of room 402B flickered once, then sank into the kind of quiet that only settles when ambition has left the space. It was nearly 10:43 p.m. Jasmine Crockett sat by herself, shoulders firm, surrounded by empty seats and half-finished cups of coffee. Her aides had left hours earlier, leaving behind scribbled notes and uneasy glances. But she remained. She always did the night before something big. Her laptop gave off a soft blue light across the dark wood table. On screen, her final notes. For tomorrow's congressional hearing, one that would reveal a troubling chain of campaign money manipulation, whispered warnings, and behind-the-curtain scare tactics. She knew exactly what she was stepping into, and who'd rather she stay silent. She highlighted one line, unrecorded influence from unofficial voices. She stopped. The irony didn't miss her. Outside, the Capitol dome stood still, looming like an old secret too tired to stay hidden. The hallways had gone silent, the kind of silence that unsettled her. There was an odd stillness tonight. Not the peaceful kind, but the sharp, alert kind. The kind that hinted something or someone had already made their move. She got up and stretched, the sound of her heels bouncing off marble and wood. Somewhere, in the hallway, a door shut. Soft, distant but intentional. She froze, waited. Nothing. The logical part of her said it was security or cleaning crew, late-night staff. But another part, the one shaped by years of sitting in rooms she was never expected to enter, sensed something different. She checked. Her phone. No new texts, no missed calls. And still she felt watched. Not like surveillance, no blinking lights, no visible cameras. But something was there, observing, waiting. She reached into her bag and pulled out a yellow legal pad, the kind her mom kept near the stove back in Texas. She flipped to a page she'd scrawled on earlier. "They won't come at you in daylight." They never do. It wasn't a quote. It wasn't for anyone else. It was something she'd written without thinking. A sentence that landed like a warning from a version of herself she hadn't met yet. She shivered. Her blazer still smelled like a long day. Ink, paper, and grit. But now something else lingered. In the air, anticipation, but not hers. She packed up slowly, intentionally, not out of fear, but something closer to ritual. When she slid her laptop into the case, the zipper snagged for half a second. That was enough to make her look up again. Still nothing. Still silence. Still that strange quiet. She turned off the light. The click echoed louder than expected. Down the hall, she passed a portrait of Shirley Chisholm. Jasmine stopped just long enough to whisper, almost on instinct, "They still don't know who they're dealing with." The air outside the hearing room felt colder than it had all day. She walked toward the elevator. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't pick up. Not yet. She stepped inside, pressed the button, the doors closed, and just before they did, she thought she saw something shift at the far end of the hallway, just past where the light stopped. She blinked. Gone. But the feeling stayed. Not fear exactly, something more like recognition. Like the next 24 hours had already started watching her. It was just 7 days earlier when Jasmine Crockett stepped into the studio, her heels firm. Her face calm, the kind of calm that shows up before the storm you're ready to face. The interview was supposed to be a policy recap, Another standard talk about dark money, unchecked influence, and the fading lines of campaign transparency. But Jasmine had figured out a long time ago, if you only focus on the system, the shadows stay untouched. The host leaned forward, smiling politely but stiffly. Congresswoman Crockett, you've said recently that power often hides behind proximity. What do you mean by that? Jasmine took a breath, then another, then, without raising her brow, she said, I mean, we've spent years chasing titles and public names, while the fingerprints of American silence belong to the unelected, the ones in the background, the ones who never show up on a ballot but whisper into the calls that shape our laws. You know who I'm talking about. Political spouses, donors, fixers. They don't hold office, but they hold power. The host blinked. Behind the glass, the usually relaxed control room went stiff. Jasmine kept going, unfazed. And let's be honest, some of those fingerprints aren't just on legislation. They're on the threats that come after. Threats aimed at women who speak too loud. Threats that don't carry names, but come with fallout. No names, no direct shots. But every word landed heavy, like smoke, the kind that tells you there's a fire just behind the wall. That night, the clip blew up. Within hours, the internet split into sides, those who praised her guts and those who called her reckless. Pundits argued if she was calling someone out. Articles surfaced with headlines, like Crockett's jab at power behind the curtain and, did she just call out the former First Lady? But it was the bots who showed up first, fast, coordinated, and aggressive. Her social feeds lit up with hate, some vulgar, some clearly pre-written, others darker in tone. A hashtag started trending, subtle in wording but sharp in meaning. Stay in your lane, Jasmine. The hate didn't feel random, it felt assigned. Then came the think pieces, from writers linked to political families and donor circles, defending the dignity of women who choose not to be political but still stand beside powerful men. One paper, known for its barely hidden loyalties, ran the headline in bold, First Lady's circle feels targeted by unfair remarks. No names yet, but Melania Trump wasn't exactly known for shouting. She didn't post in caps or charge into microphones. She believed in graceful retaliation, and those who'd seen her operate up close understood. When she felt threatened, she moved quietly and let the aftermath talk for her. Behind closed doors, Jasmine's staff began noticing odd calls to supporters, invitations quietly rescinded, a national event delayed without a stated reason. Jasmine smiled through all of it, but she took note. And then came the message. No, subject line, no visible sender, just a lone sentence. Some truths don't need microphones. They require care. She didn't share it. She didn't speak of it publicly, but she printed it, folded it once, and tucked it into the inner pocket of her blazer. Now standing in the quiet Capitol corridor a week later, Jasmine still recalled that second in the studio, not for what she said, but for how certain people received it. She hadn't named anyone, yet someone still felt exposed. And when those who are used to watching from behind the curtain feel exposed, they don't flinch. They push back. The clock on Jasmine Crockett's nightstand glowed dimly. 2:17 a.m. Beyond her window, Washington, D.C. slept beneath a cold, muted sky. Inside, the air sat heavy, unnaturally calm. She'd been half asleep, the kind of unsettled sleep that visits before a day the world won't forget, when her phone lit up beside her pillow. Unknown number. She stared at it. Her first thought was to let it ring. Anyone calling at this hour was either desperate or dangerous, but something about this moment felt crafted, deliberate. She sat up slowly, sheets sliding off as she reached for the phone. She didn't speak right away, just raised it to her ear and waited. There was a pause, brief but loaded. Then the voice came, soft-spoken, low, laced with accent and distance, but disturbingly clear. A voice the public recognized from photos, curated interviews and red carpet smiles. But this one had no lights, no filter, only motive. This is your final warning. Jasmine didn't flinch. If you speak tomorrow, your family will be in the spotlight. They won't withstand it. The voice didn't get louder, it didn't need to. That was the threat, no shouting, just pinpoint precision. Each word landed with weight, not because of volume, but because it promised to vanish without trace. The words of someone who'd never say sorry, because she'd never leave evidence. Jasmine's free hand reached across her nightstand. Not to switch on a lamp, but to slide open the top drawer. Inside was a slim voice recorder. She used it for thoughts, quick reminders. But tonight, it had a different task. Without shifting her gaze from the dark corner where her thoughts had started to gather, she pressed record. A tiny red dot blinked on. She said nothing. Not yet. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fright, but from the sharp realization that history had entered the room. Still, her eyes didn't shift. Her jaw stayed tight. She didn't gasp, didn't reply, didn't interrupt. She listened. The line went quiet again, not cut off, just breathing. Then the voice returned, softer now, almost rehearsed. You're young, smart. They like you. For now. Don't ruin that. The attention won't be what you expect. It wasn't begging. It was business. Pressure dressed as concern. Jasmine leaned forward, elbow on knee, phone pressed gently to her ear. She didn't speak, but her thoughts raced, mapping the tone, the phrasing, the invisible network behind it. Not a personal threat, a professional one. A warning shaped by someone who'd, done this before. Still, Jasmine hadn't said a word. After another long pause, the call ended. No name, no trail. She lowered the phone slowly, then looked at the blinking recorder. Still on, she let it run 10 more seconds. Just silence. A silence full of meaning. Then she hit stop. The room suddenly felt colder. She stayed seated for a while, replaying the voice in her head. Not just the words, but the calculation within them. It wasn't fury, it wasn't fear, it was control. The kind that only feels shaken when truth threatens to sound louder than power. Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stood. Walked to the closet and laid out tomorrow's outfit. The navy suit. The one with the inner pocket. She placed the recorder inside, zipped it closed, and said to no one in particular, "Let's see how they like the spotlight." Morning light crept over the Capitol dome, stretching long shadows across the marble floors. Shadows quieter than the footsteps above them. It was just past 7:30 a.m. when Jasmine Crockett walked into her office, her navy suit crisp, her face unreadable. The only noise was the soft tap of her heels, quieter than usual. Inside, her chief of staff, Renee Wallace, waited. Arms folded, eyes sharp. A former campaign fighter with a sixth sense for risk. Renee didn't waste time on greetings. "You didn't answer my messages," she said. "We've got a situation." Jasmine shrugged off her coat, stayed silent. Renee began pacing now. 3 false stories about you popped up overnight. One's already viral in Florida. We traced 2 back to a burner account that only posts political hit jobs during major hearings. You know what that points to? Jasmine gave a slow nod. She walked to her desk, opened the top drawer, and set the voice recorder neatly on the desk pad. Then she looked at Renee, not with fear, but with focus. Renee's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" Jasmine sat down, exhaled, and pressed play. The voice spilled into the room like a cold draft, steady, sharp, foreign. "This is your final warning. If you speak tomorrow, your family will be the story." Renee froze. Jasmine didn't move as the voice played. She didn't need to. Renee's reaction said everything. Her eyes widened, her jaw locked. When the message ended, the energy in the room had shifted. This wasn't about media spin anymore. It was about protection. Renee sat across from Jasmine, hands clenched. "You need to reconsider. This isn't just strategy, it's personal. They're not stopping at headlines. They're reaching homes. You're not just a congresswoman, Jazz. You're someone's daughter, someone's sister." Jasmine looked out the window for a moment. Below, the city buzzed as usual. Cars moved, staffers rushed, tourists lined up. Life moved forward as if staying quiet was always the wiser move. As if fear was just another name for caution. But Jasmine had never believed in that. "Do you think they send calls like that to men?" she asked softly. Renee sighed, her expression shifting. "No, men get hit pieces, women get silence, or fear wrapped as protection." A long pause followed, the kind that settles between two women who've stood in rooms not built for them but stood anyway. Jasmine picked up the recorder and slipped it into her blazer pocket. "They want me to fold," she said. "Not because I'm wrong, but because I'm getting close." Renee nodded slowly and stood. "Then let's make it matter. We control the message. If you move forward, we do this our way. No leaks, no rebuttals, we release the tape live. No filter. Just truth." A knock at the door. Jasmine's comms director leaned in, clipboard in hand. "Press is here early. Chairwoman wants remarks by 9. Renee turned to Jasmine. Jasmine met her gaze. "We're not sending remarks," she said. "We're bringing proof." The aide disappeared down the hall. Renee stood in the doorway, hands firm on her hips. "One more thing." Jasmine turned. "If that call ever happens again, next time wake me too." Jasmine smiled just faintly. "Next time," she said. "They won't even bother calling." The morning haze hadn't yet lifted over D.C., but sunlight was already sliding across the windowsill of Jasmine's office, casting soft gold streaks over the carpet. She sat still, elbows resting on the edge of her desk, phone propped up on a stand as the FaceTime tone rang twice, then a third time, and finally her younger brother Marcus popped up on screen, blinking into the camera. Shirt a little wrinkled, eyes filled with concern even before she spoke. "You okay?" he asked, skipping a hello. Jasmine gave a slight nod. "I'm up, I'm focused, I'm fine." "You're not fine." He leaned back, rubbing at his temples. "There's a thread about you on some far-right forum with 200 comments. They're already pulling Mom into it. They found photos from church, James Church." She exhaled through her nose. Slow, deliberate. It was expected. No, it wasn't. Political backlash was one thing, but this was about character destruction, manufactured scandal, the kind of stuff that lives online forever and gets whispered in grocery store aisles long after headlines fade. Jasmine didn't argue. She just listened because he wasn't wrong. They had grown up knowing that public shame didn't always need facts. Sometimes it just needed repetition. A lie told often enough could become someone's memory, even if it never actually happened. And when it came to black women in power, the lies didn't need to be clever, just loud. "I told her," Marcus went on, lowering his voice. But she already knew. Jasmine looked up. "How is she?" "Tired. She didn't sleep. Said something about déjà vu." That made Jasmine pause. "Put her on," she said. A few seconds later, the camera shifted and the face of their mother, Claudine Crockett, filled the screen. Petite, silver-haired, wrapped in a blue housecoat. Her eyes were steady, but they didn't smile. "Well," Claudine said, voice gravelly, with age but lined with steel, "you've kicked the nest, haven't you?" Jasmine gave a faint smirk. "Didn't mean to kick, just told the truth." "Truth always kicks," her mother replied, "especially when the wrong folks get too comfortable." There was a beat of silence between them, the kind that exists between women who know what presence costs. Claudine had grown up in the South, marched without cameras, protested when quiet was expected. She'd endured school board meetings where her name was said like a threat, not a compliment. And now her daughter stood in Congress, not behind a man, but in front of a microphone. "I just wanted to check in," Jasmine said softly. "No," her mother replied firmly. "You wanted to ask if I'd be okay if you didn't back down, and the answer is simple." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping but sharpening. "If you retreat now, then she didn't threaten you. She trained you." Jasmine blinked. The words landed sharp and clear. "That woman doesn't want your quiet, Jasmine. She wants your surrender, the way they always have. Soft on the outside, ruthless underneath. But we weren't raised to fear whispers." Marcus stepped back into the frame, arms crossed. "We just want you safe, that's all." "I know," Jasmine said. "And you're still doing this?" he asked. She looked down at the blazer draped over her chair, the one holding the recording. "I already did," she answered. Her mother gave a small nod, almost ritual. "Then hold your head high. Let them know we don't fold quietly." The call ended with no goodbye, just a shared silence. And in that silence, Jasmine found more strength than any statement, any headline or any counter-narrative. She closed the screen, rolled her shoulders back. The next time someone asked if she was sure about her choice, she'd recall this moment, because some threats aim to scare you, and some remind you who raised you. The morning air in her office was crisp, tinged with that sterile chill only government buildings seem to perfect, the kind that hums through old vents and reminds you nothing here is ever really warm. Jasmine Crockett stood beside her desk, the city starting to stir beyond the frosted windows, while inside everything stayed still, deliberate, waiting. On the desk sat the thick navy blue folder she'd prepped for days. Tabs were color-coded, pages cross-referenced, statements footnoted, highlighted, printed twice. It was the kind of proof no one could call anecdotal. Dates, donors, pressure, points. It was built to be airtight, and yet now it felt unfinished. She laid her hand on top, fingers resting on the surface like she was checking if it still carried weight. It had truth, yes, the kind that makes people shift and expensive. Suits. But after last night's call, truth alone didn't seem enough. Truth could be ignored, but voice carried. Jasmine sat down, the chair creaking slightly beneath her, and opened the folder. The pages fanned out in front of her like a legal war. Map, charts of donation oddities, anonymous accounts of behind-the-scenes pressure, and a long list of non-coordinated political committees that always acted in sync. It was solid, legally safe, strategically tight, but it was built for the rules. And last night she'd heard something playing by none of them. She reached into her purse and pulled out the recorder, placing it softly on the desk next to the folder. Then, with deliberate, almost ritual motion, she pulled a blank cover sheet from the printer tray and wrote across the top in bold letters, "Midnight Call, Raw Audio." She slid it into a plastic sleeve, tucked it behind the final tab, and closed the folder with a quiet, firm thud. The sound felt louder than it should have, final even. She leaned back slightly, eyes drifting toward the ceiling, not looking for answers, just clarity. One sentence kept repeating in her mind, uninvited, but clear. She said, "Final warning." But she never asked the real question, who's watching her? Because that was the truth nobody liked to admit. People in power always assumed they were the ones looking down, hardly ever thinking about who might be watching from below with sharper vision, longer memory, and less to risk. Melania Trump had influence, yes, the soft, graceful kind that didn't require a title anymore. She had reach, she had loyalty. But Jasmine had something else. She had evidence, not just of misconduct, but of the tactics used to keep that misconduct buried. And that she knew was what made her a threat. She didn't need to outshout anyone. She didn't need to accuse. All she had to do was press play and let the audio speak for itself. The knock on the door came light, then slightly firmer. Her aide peeked in. 10 minutes, press is already setting up. Jasmine nodded without turning around. She picked up the folder, felt its heft again in her hands, then slid it beneath her arm. As she rose, the sunlight hit the desk where the folder had been, an empty space, briefly warm. She walked out without a word, but as the door clicked shut, behind her, the line repeated once more in her head, not as fear, but as a challenge. She said final warning, but she never asked the real question. Who's watching her? And Jasmine already had the answer. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the black SUV, the sun had just started to tint the eastern sky with streaks of fire orange and pale blue. The Capitol stood ahead like a statue carved from tension. Itself, still harsh, unblinking. It was the kind of morning that looked peaceful in photos, but pulsed with the kind of energy that felt ready to burst. The crowd had already gathered at the base of the steps. They weren't yelling yet. Not all of them, but the signs were held high. Some had slogans about overreach, others about defending traditional roles, and a few more made it personal. Her name was printed in bold letters above doctored headlines and things she'd never said. She recognized the game, manufactured outrage, synchronized doubt. The same playbook every woman in her seat had seen before. She didn't flinch. As she stepped forward, a reporter tried to shout, "Congresswoman Crockett, any comments before the hearing?" But Jasmine didn't break stride. She walked like someone whose destination had already been stitched into her spine. One sign caught her eye, not because it was crueler, but because it was cleaner, plainer. Silence is safer. It wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the watchers, the ones wondering maybe she should have stayed quiet. Inside, the building greeted her with a different kind of noise. The low murmur of prep, the shuffle of aides, the rustle of papers and checkpoints. Lights flicked on, microphones clipped. It all looked routine, and yet every motion felt a little too precise, too rehearsed. As she passed the first corridor, a man stepped out from a janitor's closet. Older, gray-stubbled, wearing worn navy overalls with the Capitol logo stitched across the chest. His hands were tough, his stance tired, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't say his name. He didn't have to. He looked straight at her and said low, "Don't let the weight of their money drown out your truth." Then he turned, mop in hand, and faded into another hall. Jasmine stood still for a beat, his words hanging longer than they should have, not because they were poetic, but because they were real, coming from someone with no mic, no spotlight, just perspective. She started walking again, tighter now, more focused. The words didn't just echo in her head, they moved in her bloodstream, because she knew what was coming. It wouldn't be loud, it would be careful, questions framed to sound respectful, words laced with suggestion, efforts to poke not at her facts but her delivery, her look, her nerve to bring truth into a room built to muffle it. She entered the chamber through a side hall. The seats were already filling. Press sat at the back. One cameraman leaned in to whisper something. A staffer at the committee desk glanced up, then quickly away. At the witness table sat a sealed folder, navy, sharp-edged. Inside were timelines, donation patterns, policy overlaps, and one new piece, clearly marked in her own script. Midnight call. Raw audio. She sat, drew in a breath, and from somewhere deep, maybe her memory, heard her mother's voice again. "If you back down now, then she didn't scare you. She taught you." The clock ticked toward the hour. Outside, the crowd swelled louder. Inside, Jasmine Crockett straightened her blazer, locked eyes with the chairwoman, and got ready to speak. Not to argue her case, but to dare them to ignore it. The hearing room was full, uncomfortably so. Every seat taken. Every wall lined with people who weren't just present but alert. Staffers stood with clipboards held too tightly. Reporters murmured under their breath, fingers twitching on keyboards. Cameras mounted overhead panned slow, catching faces, angles, tension. You could feel it, that humming quiet of anticipation. The room had seen scandal, seen showdowns, but this was different. Not noisy, not wild. It was the stillness before something deliberate, like someone walking into a gallery already knowing which painting was about to vanish. Jasmine Crockett sat still at the witness table, blazer smoothed, folder closed before her. No paper spread out, no rushed scribbling. Her composure wasn't just practiced, it was commanding, controlled, not because she felt secure, but because she knew they expected her to break. Melania Trump wasn't in the room, but her presence lingered. 3 seats over sat a known strategist, a former First Lady aide turned media handler, famous for crafting stories like scalpels. 2 rows back sat a family foundation head, hands folded, watching for which way the tide would tilt. They weren't spectators. They were signals. At the center of the dais sat Chairwoman Eleanor Markham, a centrist Democrat with the rare gift of silencing a room without raising her tone. She tapped the gavel once. "We now move to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The floor is yours for 10 minutes. Jasmine stood. Her voice was steady before she even parted her lips, the kind of calm that didn't come from peace but from purpose. "Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, honored guests," she began, eyes sweeping the room just once, deliberately. "Today I'm here not to guess but to confirm, not to blame but to expose. And I ask that we not mistake silence for respect or discomfort for bias." There was no shuffle of papers, no need. "What we've witnessed in recent months isn't merely a case of campaign finance errors," she continued, "but a network of unspoken power and hidden pressure shaping public results, cloaked behind surnames that never show up on ballots." Someone near the back shifted in place. "I want to speak to that power because it doesn't come in through the front door. It doesn't march beneath the rotunda in sunlight. It calls from behind shut doors. It murmurs through contributions, and sometimes it speaks late at night with a voice meant only to be heard, never documented. The room didn't stir. Not a movement, not a breath, not yet. Jasmine let the silence linger. She knew the method. Let the quiet after the sentence carry the same weight as the words themselves. "I have here," she said, gently resting her hand. On the shut folder, a series of verified messages, timeline links, and known donor overlaps. But that's not the most important part today. Now heads turned. Not all at once, but just enough. What matters is that certain individuals, powerful ones, have gotten too used to speaking off the record and skating off the hook. Today, that changes. The chairwoman leaned in slightly. Jasmine's voice didn't rise, but the moment did, because today one of those voices wasn't off the record. Every camera zoomed in. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. She didn't open the folder yet. She didn't even shift, but the meaning landed like a blow. Somewhere in the third row, someone's hand dropped from their cheek. Somewhere behind her, a junior aide mouthed, "Did she say recorded?" And still, Jasmine remained still, precise. The room didn't just hold its breath. It tightened. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her tone. She didn't have to. Instead, she laid out the figures, structured patterns in campaign funding, time-stamped overlaps between allegedly independent super PACs and family-run political groups, and suspicious funding halts that always seemed to happen within 24 hours of pushback. She constructed the case with care, each point supported with a graph, a footnote, a date. No guesses, just evidence, stark and undeniable. The committee followed, pens moving, heads nodding gradually. The journalists had their headlines. The cameras had their scene. But Jasmine wasn't there for that. She paused, not for drama, but because something in the room shifted. She looked directly at the chairwoman, then allowed her eyes to drift purposefully around the room. "I'd like to add something," she said, her voice steady, calm enough to sound dangerous. "Not just facts, a detail." Now came the stillness. "I received a call this morning," she went on. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the caller didn't give a name. They didn't need to. A few aides glanced up from their notebooks. They said, and I quote, "This is your final warning. If you speak tomorrow, your family will be the story." The response was immediate. Sharp inhales, a hand covering lips, a couple eyebrows rising in the second and third rows. The room didn't burst. It shrank. Jasmine let the moment sink in. Then she calmly reached into the folder before her. No noise, no uncertainty. She drew out the recorder, the same one that had blinked quietly in the darkness, now resting silent. She placed it on the table carefully, raised a finger and pressed play. At first, just stillness, the kind of silence that makes people lean in without realizing it. Then the voice, low, clear, feminine, accented, and unmistakably familiar. "This is your final warning." A ripple moved through the room. Not a sound, but a chill like the air had been drained. "If you speak tomorrow, your family will be the story." No name was spoken, but everyone in the room recognized what they'd heard, and who had said it. Jasmine let the audio run 5 seconds longer, just long enough for the click to cut off the line. Then she pressed stop. No explanation. No need. Silence. No one checked their phones. No one glanced at notes. Because right then all eyes were on her. Some stunned, some shaken, some afraid. Not of Jasmine, but of what her refusal to waver now meant. A congressional aide near the exit swallowed hard. Someone at the press table let their pen roll off the desk but didn't move to grab it. Across the dais, a committee member known for backing conservative causes rubbed her thumb along the binder's edge, like looking for something solid. Chairwoman Markham didn't speak immediately. She didn't have to. The silence itself was the statement. Jasmine looked ahead. This wasn't defense. It was reflection. And for the first time in a long time, the room had nothing to say. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the hearing room, the first clip was already live. Within 42 minutes, it had passed 50,000 views. By the end of the first hour, it had crossed 200,000. And by hour 2, it was everywhere. Not just political sites and news feeds, but reaction reels, satire pages, live stream breakdowns, Instagram edits layered with dramatic audio. The hashtags came first. Final warning. Melania midnight call. She did not flinch. Screens across the country, in coffee shops, airports, lecture halls, break rooms, were replaying that same 2-minute moment. Jasmine's calm voice, the press of a button, and then that undeniable voice saying what no one believed anyone ever would. Some rewatched in shock. Others hit replay in disbelief. Some didn't need the whole video, just the line, "Your family will be the story." It was the sort of threat that had always lurked behind the scenes. Hinted, whispered, always denied. But now it was caught on audio, and it was delivered with poise. Icy poise, the kind that made it all the more terrifying. Right-wing networks scrambled first. One host, known for unwavering defense of the Trump family, leaned into suspicion. "There's no evidence the voice is real," he insisted. "Deepfake tools are incredibly advanced. This might be politically timed slander." Another guest suggested that the clip had been selectively trimmed. Yet side-by-side voice comparisons started appearing within an hour. Language experts, audio engineers, and even fans of Melania's earlier interviews all agreed. The rhythm, the tone, the breathing, it was her, unmistakably. Progressive commentators erupted. One segment opened with a headline that read, "Not a conspiracy, a confession." A seasoned political reporter, long seen as impartial, went live from D.C. and stated plainly, "This isn't just a phone call. It's a culture exposed. The idea that authority could be quiet, polished, and totally unaccountable until someone finally hits record. Even satire shows joined in." One late-night host imitated the voice, then stopped, dropped the bit, and said, "Jasmine Crockett may have just done what countless politicians never dared." She made silence twitch. The internet responded like a tidal wave. Old tweets came back. Threads chronicling Melania's most puzzling public appearances were picked apart again. Footage from past interviews where she dodged influence-related questions were now subtitled, replayed, and broken down. Jasmine's supporters started sharing old clips of her speeches, especially one from her first campaign where she'd said, "If I've got a mic, I'm using it, because someone's always trying to switch it off." That line hit a t-shirt in under 6 hours, but not all the feedback was kind. An anonymous post from a well-connected donor circle shared a cryptic thread. "Some people confuse courage with carelessness. Let's see how long she lasts in this arena." Meanwhile, Crockett's team stayed silent. No pressers, no clarifications, no replies, because they didn't need one. The recording spoke louder than any statement. By day's end, public opinion polls swung fast. One found 68% believed Jasmine had done the right thing by exposing the audio. Another asked whether political spouses should face oversight, a question that had never hit mainstream surveys, and it got 79% approval. The conversation had shifted, not just about Jasmine, not just about Melania, but about the thin line between visible power and hidden control. And through it all, one short clip kept looping online. From family rooms to hearing rooms to lecture halls, a hushed voice saying something that had finally been pulled into the open, and a woman staring forward, unshaken. In the hours after, the audio shattered the internet. The world turned its attention to Melania Trump, and she disappeared. No interviews, no tweets, no strolls across tarmacs in selected heels and sunglasses. Not even a recycled photo or cryptic caption about grace under fire. The First Lady who once built an entire brand around quiet now leaned deep into it, a silence so precise it echoed. By hour 12, speculation flooded every online corner. Was it really her voice? Was the file tampered with? Could it have been generated? A few Twitter threads tried to cast doubt, citing shaky waveform readings or sketchy timestamps. But those theories fell apart quickly under expert scrutiny. Matched audios and years of public recordings. The pacing, the tone, the pauses. They were hers. No question. And still she stayed absent. That gap only amplified the frenzy. Major networks filled airtime with guests debating intent, legality, political consequences, and expectations for first spouses. Former aides to other first ladies spoke up. Some defended her as a private individual. Others argued her silence insulted transparency. But the strongest response didn't come from Melania. It came from Jasmine. She didn't book follow-up spots. She didn't hit the late-night couches. When asked for a comment outside the Capitol, she gave just one sentence. cool, exact, and cutting through like a headlight on a shadowed street. I didn't need to prove who she was. I needed to prove who I am. That sentence, 11 words, spread faster than the audio itself. It turned into an Instagram caption, a banner quote, even the new bio line for young organizers across the country. Because Jasmine's aim wasn't to trap a former First Lady into saying anything. It was to reveal how power acts when it's finally exposed, and how silence, when used as a weapon, can scream louder than any denial. On day 2, reporters camped out at Melania's usual haunts. The gates of her Florida property stayed shut. Her PR team replied with a simple no comment. Her socials stayed untouched, but the public noticed. They saw the absence, the dodge, the restraint that didn't feel elegant. It felt strategic. Conspiracy theories got louder, but the core held. Across regular America, the mood wasn't skeptical. It was awake. She doesn't need to confirm anything, one columnist wrote. The silence is the confirmation. Meanwhile, Jasmine received over 30,000 messages in 3 days. Letters, DMs, emails, notes slid under her district office door. Many were from women who'd been told, publicly or privately, to keep quiet. A few came from former insiders and political families, anonymous, careful but thankful. And one card, plain white with no return address, arrived with just 3 words inside. She's silent because she can't afford to be wrong. On the 3rd day, a Washington Post headline nailed the shift perfectly. When power refuses to speak, it still makes a sound. And by the 72nd hour, America had stopped wondering if the tape was legit and started asking what else had never been caught. It all began with one voice. Not a press conference whistleblower, not an elected official, but a former White House staffer who only spoke off the record. Her name wasn't printed. Her face wasn't shown, but her words reached 3 top political reporters and triggered a chain no strategist could bury. She made more than one call, the source said. This wasn't an incident. This was habit. According to the staffer, Melania Trump had on at least 3 occasions during her husband's presidency made direct contact with women she saw as threats to stability. The phrase was vague, but the intent was clear. Women who spoke too loudly, too boldly, or too close to something real. The staffer described the tone of those calls. Calm, non-aggressive, always framed as concern. But what followed was always the same. An internet smear, a sudden chill in their careers, a strategic hit piece questioning their credibility. Most times there was no tape, just memory, just damage. Until Jasmine, that changed everything. The first media outlet to publish the scoop was cautious, citing an unnamed ex-aide with first-hand knowledge. But once it dropped, the dam cracked. Reporters who had once covered the East Wing like it was a fashion column suddenly had reason to comb through their files. They pulled schedules, checked call logs, reviewed old photos, ones where Melania stood smiling next to women who would soon vanish from the limelight. A pattern started to appear. Subtle, not loud, but repeating. Old images came back, not damning, but telling. One especially made headlines. A candid photo from a 2019 charity gala showing Melania seated beside a former State Department advisor who'd publicly called out internal sexism. Less than a week later, that advisor's nomination for a UN position was abruptly pulled. No statement, no rebuttal, just silence. Then came more. Internal memos from campaign staffers using coded phrases like soft perimeter management and preemptive quieting. A leaked message from a top comms aide read, "She likes to make the call herself. It's cleaner." None of this on its own was explosive, but together, it was undeniable. By day 5, the phrase "the silent strategy" was trending, and columnists weren't just picking apart the audio, they were analyzing what it didn't include. The absence of fury, the lack of chaos, the sheer calculated control of Melania's voice had become the focus. This wasn't just a one-time threat. One investigative podcast determined it was a tactic. And Jasmine Crockett didn't simply endure it, she uncovered it. Even late-night comedy took notice. One host held up a still of Melania during a past live speech, frozen mid-blink, and joked, "Some people blink when they lie. She doesn't blink when she warns you." And still, Melania stayed quiet. Her team gave no pushback, no explanation, no lawsuits. She stayed where she'd always operated best, just outside the frame, just beyond reach, just outside accountability. But now that silence wasn't her armor, it was her stamp. The same quiet that once wrapped her in mystique now rang out as evidence. Because in the court of public opinion, sometimes you don't need an admission. You just need enough people to recognize the design behind the curtain, and this time someone finally yanked it open. The media had assembled expecting Jasmine. Instead, they got someone else, someone surprising. Cameras tilted, microphones leaned in, and from behind the heavy curtain of the press room, a woman emerged in a navy coat with buttons that seemed decades old, but flawless. Her pace wasn't quick, but it was strong, deliberate, anchored like every step landed exactly where it should. She didn't take the podium like a politician. She claimed it like a mother. "I know many of you were expecting my daughter," she began, her voice soft but focused. "But today it felt necessary for you to meet the woman who raised her." A pause filled the space, not awkward, sacred. "My name is Melania Crockett. I am not a congresswoman. I am not on television. But I'm someone who's been chased by dogs in the South for trying to vote. I've had my job put at risk for asking for fair pay, and I've watched powerful folks silence others, not with violence or bars, but with gossip, image, and fear." Journalists slowly set down their pens. Some had started typing. Now, they were just absorbing. "My daughter wasn't raised in comfort," she added. "She was raised in truth, and truth isn't always kind. It doesn't always win trophies or get applause. Sometimes truth walks into a space and everyone looks away, but Jasmine learned early you walk into the threat, not from it. You don't raise your voice for noise. You raise it when silence is the lie." Her fingers quivered lightly as they gripped the podium, not out of nerves, but from the weight of decades waiting for this moment. Last night, Jasmine had asked if she should move forward with her testimony. Leona hadn't given her advice. She reminded her of her roots. Because when you're born into resistance, you don't always choose the fight, but you do choose your position. Across the nation, news anchors scrambled to interrupt programming. Live streams surged with viewers. Within under an hour, a clip of Melania Crockett saying, "She didn't inherit fear. She inherited me," hit 3 million views and was reposted with the caption, "The real First Lady just showed up." And in that instant, something shifted, not in Congress, not in breaking news, but in the minds of people watching from apartments, nursing homes, dorm rooms, union halls. They didn't just view Jasmine differently, they saw who shaped her. And that changed the game. Leona ended her speech without dramatics. "I will not answer questions today," she said, "because this isn't about theater. It's about setting things right. And in our house, we don't threaten people. We raise them." Then she gave one nod, stepped down, and exited the way she came. Quiet but certain, like a storm you don't see until the trees begin to bend. The day no spin team could undo what was spoken. No political handler could rewrite a mother's clarity. Because when Melania Crockett spoke into that mic, she wasn't only speaking for her daughter. She spoke for every woman ever told to hush, every household ever silently targeted, every truth forced to wait its turn. And for the first time since that late-night call, Jasmine Crockett didn't need to say anything. The country had already heard what mattered. The envelope arrived, with no sender name, no stamp, no seal. Just a weathered off-white square slipped beneath her office door like the writer didn't want credit, only truth. Jasmine almost overlooked it, buried under budgets and policy memos. It might have been missed if not for the blot, blue ink bleeding from the corner. One word had soaked through, grandchild. She opened it. "Dear Congresswoman, my name is Eloise Turner. I'm 83 years old, retired librarian, Mississippi born and bred. I watched your hearing on an old TV my grandson helped me set up. He's 9, doesn't usually sit still for politics. But that night, he didn't blink. When the clip played, I looked at him. He wasn't frightened. He wasn't lost. He was crying, not from fear but pride." Jasmine reread the sentence, then again. Her throat tightened. She didn't know Eloise, but she knew the emotion, that deep pride that sneaks in late. Recognition you never expected, the letter continued. I used to shelve books that were banned, ones that spoke of people like us. I understood the weight of silence. I also knew the risks of speaking. And for a long time I taught young girls to whisper their stories only when it was safe. I regret that. But seeing you, hearing that tape, watching you stand firm while others squirmed, I saw something. You weren't speaking to Melania Trump. You were speaking to the spell we've all lived under. Outside, Washington buzzed like it was just another day. Tourists lined up for selfies. Reporters chased the next quote. But inside Jasmine's office, time paused. She leaned back in her chair, holding the letter like something sacred. It wasn't just gratitude. It was an awakening, a legacy, a silence cracking open too long to name. You broke something that night. Not decorum, not loyalty. You shattered the illusion that they can scare us in shadows and still rule us in public. A single tear traced her face. She wasn't the emotional type, not on camera, not even in solitude. But this was different. Eloise hadn't written to a leader. She wrote to a reflection, to the younger version of herself she never got to be. And suddenly, Jasmine understood. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about scandal. Not even about Melania. It was history answering itself. She folded the letter gently, like resealing it might mute its power, then reached for a brass frame and slid the note inside, replacing the old picture that had sat there since her first term. From now on, when people asked what kept her in the fight, she'd point to the line, "You broke the illusion." For the first time in days, Jasmine felt the burden lift, not from winning, but from knowing. And as she stared at the framed letter on her shelf, she whispered, "They never broke the spell, because we were always the magic. Here is your lightly rewritten script following all your instructions." Only 2 words changed per sentence. Same structure, tone, and paragraph, formatting preserved. The clip of Jasmine playing the midnight recording had already hit over 14 million views within 48 hours. But the ripple impact was only beginning. First came the petition. It began on a modest civic site, posted by a grandmother from Ohio who hadn't touched social media until that week. Its title was simple, "No Immunity for Coercion." Within hours, it was shared by veterans' coalitions, civil justice organizations, and even a network of retired teachers who once marched alongside Coretta Scott King. Within days, the petition had crossed over 300,000 signatures. And then came the letters. Handwritten ones, emailed ones, typed notes, scanned in faxes to congressional desks. They came from students who said, "I stayed up to watch change unfold," from nurses on graveyard shifts who whispered, "She didn't back away, so we won't either," and from elderly veterans who hadn't penned a letter since the war but now wrote, "We know what a real threat sounds like, and what bravery looks like too." One letter stood out. It was addressed to the woman with the microphone, and it came from a quiet town in Kansas. "Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I am 82. I've seen presidents fall and rise again, but I've never seen a first lady try to silence someone so openly, and fail so completely. What you didn't just keep talking. You made the nation listen. Thank you, just a grandfather with a heart still pumping for justice." The press called it the Jasmine effect. It wasn't only about one call. It was about the nerve to threaten silence, and the louder answer that followed. By the end of the week, something unplanned happened. A national march was announced, scheduled for the next Saturday. But it wasn't called Justice for Jasmine. It was named The Midnight We Didn't Sleep, and that said everything. People weren't walking just for one woman anymore. They were walking because a line had been crossed and caught. Because an accent, a threat, and a name, murmured in the dark, had tried to undo something vital. The right to speak truth without fear. One organizer told the media, "This isn't just protest, it's preservation." She didn't drop the mic. She passed it to us. The crowd was projected to be in the hundreds, but by the morning of the march, cities from Atlanta to Oakland were reporting massive crowds. Candlelight vigils lined the boulevards. At 2:17 a.m., exactly 1 week after the call, marchers in Washington, D.C. stood in shared silence for 60 seconds. Some cried, some just closed their eyes, but every single one of them was alert. And Jasmine, she watched from the Capitol. Steps, the same folder in hand. She didn't raise it, she didn't wave, she just stood still, proud and seen. 3 days had passed since Jasmine Crockett played the now infamous midnight clip in front of the whole nation. The audio, just 38 seconds long, had been dissected on every station, podcast, and group chat. Voice experts confirmed the accent. Lip readers tried to link old footage. Even silence became a battleground, and through it all, Melania Trump had stayed completely quiet. Until now. On the morning of the 4th day, the statement appeared, not in a press briefing but as a single graphic on her verified social profile. A pale cream background with bold black text spaced just right. I have always stood for women's strength. I believe in dialogue, not division. Let us rise above sensationalism and return to what matters, unity and grace. No name was listed. No call was rejected, no apology, no explanation. The image had no caption, no comments were enabled. It was clinical, strategic, built for vagueness, shaped to calm. But it landed like cold marble. Within moments, hashtags started swirling. In other words, she did call Tapji Midnight means accountability. A former communications aide on CNN raised an eyebrow live on air. This reads like a brand trying to survive a recall, not a former First Lady addressing a national scandal involving personal pressure. Jasmine, when asked by journalists for a response, said only, "I wasn't expecting an apology. I was hoping for a mirror. Instead, we got a curtain." Meanwhile, the people who had stood behind Jasmine weren't accepting the redirection attempt. The statement didn't mention the incident. It didn't speak to the fear, the anger, or the dignity it tried to erase. And in that silence, something heavier grew, a sense of insult layered over harm. A panel of women's rights leaders released a collective letter calling Melania's post a masterclass in erasure. One line said, "When women are threatened behind closed doors, we don't need vagueness. We need voice." Even usual allies seemed divided. A columnist at a prominent conservative site admitted it was an opening to humanize herself, to show a line between who she was and what she may have done. But instead, she chose to disappear into diplomacy. And diplomacy in times like these sounds like dodging. That night, late-night hosts had a field day. The First Lady says she believes in women's strength, just not when it's recorded after midnight. One comedian joked, drawing wild laughter. But not everyone laughed. In living rooms across the country, especially among women over 50, mothers, grandmothers, retired professionals, the phrase, "I have always stood for women's strength," felt like a sting. One retired judge posted, "Standing for strength means standing through the storm, not pretending the thunder never came." For Jasmine, however, the moment wasn't about winning. It was about recognition. She didn't need Melania's confession to prove the truth. The silence, the vagueness, the avoidance, that had done the job for her. In her own journal that evening, Jasmine scribbled something short. The powerful often think silence hides them. But in moments like this, silence lights them up. And across the country, thousands agreed. The chamber was fuller than normal. Not a single camera team had been invited. Yet somehow word had spread. Staffers lined the walls. Interns gripped notebooks with tight fingers. Even those who had once mocked Jasmine Crockett's name were seated, waiting. Jasmine stood not with a stack of pages, but with a small note card, the kind her mother used to place in her lunchbox. On it were only 5 words: "Speak truth, don't spark fire." She adjusted the mic. The silence in the room felt denser than the air. She began, "I was raised to believe that truth doesn't need armor. Just endurance, no names, no attacks. Just a voice, strong enough to hush even critics when you are threatened. Not with fists, but with status. Not with fists, but with deletion. You begin to see that intimidation wears many outfits, some of them luxury." The chamber stirred. No one needed a decoder ring to grasp who she meant. Jasmine walked a slow arc while speaking. She wasn't reading, she was remembering. "A few nights ago, I got a call. I didn't respond with fury. I responded with record. And when I hit play, not to perform but to protect, I knew I wasn't just speaking for me. I was speaking for every voice that's ever been told. You're not allowed to speak here." She paused, looked up, met eyes with someone across the aisle who had once called her too emotional for Congress. They were now watching, unblinking. I titled this speech, "When the Wife of a President Becomes the Shadow of One." But let me be clear, I'm not here to drag anyone's name into dirt. I'm here because I was dragged, and I walked back in anyway. A wave moved through the chamber. Some leaned closer. There's a kind of silence that's beautiful. The kind that holds space, honors grief, listens deeply. But there's another kind. The kind that pretends to be grace when it's really just strategy. The kind that silences to survive, not to change. And when that silence is used to shrink others, it becomes something else entirely. She glanced at her note. Speak truth. Don't spark fire. I don't need to fight to be heard. I just need to keep standing. And she did. A Republican senator, someone who hadn't clapped during any past speech, offered the first soft tap of applause. Others followed. Even a few who had bashed her in op-eds now nodded faintly, like recognizing a weight they couldn't ignore. Jasmine's last line was soft, nearly whispered. They said this was politics. I said it was personal, but maybe it was history. She stepped back. No dramatic move, no mic drop, just breath. And for the first time in recent memory, the chamber gave something rare. Silence, not because it didn't know what to say, but because it didn't want to break the moment. The sun rose without drama that morning, casting long shadows across the Capitol steps. Inside, the air held a weight that couldn't be tracked by barometers, only by what wasn't spoken. There was no media storm, no banners, no grand entrances, just the quiet hum of democracy bracing to test itself. The bipartisan ethics resolution had moved quicker than expected, not due to political urgency, but due to political memory. What Jasmine had revealed, the voice on that recording, lingered through halls and conscience alike. The draft bill didn't mention Melania Trump or any spouse, but everyone understood who it concerned. The gallery was packed but strangely quiet. Staffers, journalists, even a few former first ladies watched in silence. No one whispered, and even the reporters typed softly as if one keystroke might break the moment. The speaker brought the measure to vote, an independent panel to examine if political spouses had used their closeness to power to pressure or stifle federal oversight. Not just in Jasmine's case, but across administrations. Roll call started. Jasmine sat near the center aisle, silent. No written remarks, no stack of notes, only a folded paper in her blazer pocket, her mother's handwriting still slightly smudged from her thumbs. Truth moves slower than fear, but it always shows up. As names echoed across the chamber, aye, nay, present, the usual drama of politics vanished. No grand displays, no murmured jokes, only the clerk's voice and a build-up. Of courage, one name at a time. When her name was read, Jasmine stood. Her voice was steady but soft. Crockett. She didn't hesitate. Some turned to see her, others didn't need to. She sat again, fingers laced as if anchoring herself. She didn't look around for reactions. This wasn't performance, this was a tally, a moral count, and her vote was carved into it quietly but permanently. The count finished. The resolution passed narrowly, but it was enough. A wave passed through the chamber, not applause, something deeper, like a shared breath from a country that hadn't realized it was holding one. A reporter asked her later why she hadn't made a speech. Jasmine answered instantly, "Because this isn't revenge, it's repair." The line spread within hours, clipped and captioned, passed by teachers, veterans, single mothers, and even some past staffers from earlier administrations. And when Jasmine left the chamber, slipping away before the cameras found her, there was no anthem, no raised hand, no showy moment, just footsteps on polished floors and the sound of a country remembering what dignity looks like when it's allowed to vote. The studio lights shined warmer than they felt. Jasmine Crockett sat across from the late-night host, her posture calm but gaze steady. It had been a long week, one she hadn't seen coming, one no one on her team had rehearsed. The host leaned in, cue card in hand, voice softened. Congresswoman Crockett, I gotta ask the question that's been on everyone's mind. That night, 2:17 a.m., were you scared? The audience held its breath. Jasmine didn't flinch. Of course I was, she said, voice firm. But courage isn't about not being scared. It's doing what's necessary. Voice shaking or not, the room went quiet for a beat before erupting in applause. But Jasmine didn't bask in it. She glanced down, gathering her thoughts as though the truth still needed one last polish before being said again. It wasn't just the voice on the phone, she added. It was everything it implied. That power could come knocking at night expecting you'd open the door quietly. That fear could do what laws couldn't, make you sit down. The host nodded, his next question forgotten. Jasmine kept going, not for drama but for clarity. I didn't share that clip to shame anyone. I shared it so folks would understand what intimidation sounds like when it's dressed in pearls. And so young women watching would know they're not crazy for feeling that chill and still standing. The clip hit social media before she'd even left the set. Within hours, it had over 3 million views. The caption, voice shaking, still speaking. For many, it wasn't defiance, it was definition. And for Jasmine, it wasn't a curtain call. It was another step in a walk she never planned to end. The hallway still smelled the same. Pencil dust, printer paper, maybe even the lingering scent of cafeteria tater tots. Jasmine Crockett hadn't walked those halls in more than 20 years. But they hadn't forgotten her, and she hadn't forgotten them. The school bell rang just as she stepped into the main foyer, where students had gathered, buzzing with excitement but quieted by something deeper. She looked to the far wall and froze. There in sweeping blue and gold was a mural. Her profile, mid-speech, eyes focused ahead. Below it, a bold quote. She didn't shout. She let the truth do the echoing. Jasmine's throat tightened. The artist hadn't painted her in glory but in grace. Not with a clenched fist, but with steady intention. A teacher came forward, smiling gently. They painted it last week. Nobody asked them to. As she moved through groups of students, something shifted. Not with volume, but with recognition. Jasmine wasn't a celebrity to them. She was proof. Proof that someone who sat at those desks marked absent for a dentist visit in room 204 could return. Not to look back, but to reach forward. A girl in oversized glasses tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "You made us feel bigger." Jasmine bent slightly until their eyes met. "That's 'cause you are," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you." In the library, a handful of 8th graders gathered for a Q&A. The first question wasn't about politics. It was about fear. "Weren't you scared when she called?" Jasmine didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes," she said. "But sometimes fear doesn't stop you. It points to where the fight is." She scanned their faces, curious, open, mixed. "These halls didn't just teach me math," she added. "They taught me how to carry my name. So when the world tried to erase it, I'd know how to write it again." By the time she left, her signature was on the mural wall. Not for ego, for memory. Because in that school, for one quiet afternoon, truth echoed louder than ever. The Capitol's marble, steps stretched pale under the evening sky. Jasmine Crockett walked them alone, heels tapping stone, the echo soft, maybe dulled by the weight of what had just taken place. No camera crews followed, no reporters shouted her name. The storm had passed, but what lingered was not silence. It was something steadier, something deserved. She stepped through the grand bronze doors and turned onto the quiet path along the east lawn. The breeze caught her coat briefly, lifting it like a flag before letting it drop again. In her hand was a simple folder. No stamps, no seals, just one word written across the top in her handwriting. Inside were the call log, the recording, the threats. But more than just proof, it was remembrance. Not for payback, but for record. For those who'd later be told they imagined what they lived through. For the daughters who might one day take these steps too. A voiceover comes in, not hers, but shaped by her truth. They labeled it a threat. She turned it into a fact. She reached the last step and paused, watching the horizon stretch like a quiet promise. Her hand dropped the folder into the locked slot at the base of the Congressional Archive box. Sealed, logged, marked for a future day of public release. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't pose. She just stood there, twilight settling around her like a curtain, not closing, but starting again. Then the final words, soft but firm. She didn't raise her mic for volume. She raised it for permanence. Fade to black. Sometimes the strongest resistance doesn't come from yelling. It comes from standing still, truth in hand. Jasmine Crockett's path reminds us that dignity isn't a show. It's a decision made when no one's looking. She didn't strike back with rage. She responded with purpose. And by doing so, she turned fear into clarity. This story, while fictionalized, carries a deeper message. That silence has often been a tool of control. And sometimes the boldest move is choosing not to be quiet. In a world overflowing with noise, one woman's calm resolve shifted the whole room. What would you hold on to even if your voice shook? We'd love to know what moments of quiet strength have mattered most to you. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe to Noah's Justice Stories, where every voice counts and every story echoes past the screen. This is a fictional and dramatized piece created for inspiration, education, and storytelling. Though inspired by real public topics, it includes imagined dialogue, recreated moments, and character portrayals designed to highlight themes of dignity, justice, and resilience. Any likeness to real events or people beyond public domain is purely accidental. Our aim isn't to mislead or offend, but to spark reflection and real conversation. Thank you for being part of Noah's Justice Stories.